Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Today I finished reading Dragon Carving and the Literary Mind, and I would like to read a little passage from it. To make sense of the entire paragraph, you need to know about the footnote. He uses a figure of speech, a view limited to a tube, which alludes to a passage in chapter 17, Autumn Floods, of the book of Zhuangzi. To him there is no north or south. In utter freedom he dissolves himself in the four directions and drowns himself in the unfathomable. Now you come niggling along and try to spy him out or fix some name to him. But this is like using a tube to scan the sky or an awl to measure the depth of the earth. That's a translation by Burton Watson, I assume. So let me give you the paragraph. This is from the 50th chapter and final chapter. To evaluate one piece of work is easy. To give an overview of so many is hard. Although I have mentioned briefly some minor issues and treated in detail the essentials of writing, there must have been subtleties and nuances that have eluded my vision or gone beyond my power of language. If some of the ideas here coincide with past opinion, it does not mean that I have copied them, but that they are irrefutable. If they differ, it does not mean that I deliberately set out to contradict past opinion, but that I have no reason to accept them as true. Whether my views differ or not from other people's has nothing to do with whether these people are ancients or moderns. My foremost concern is to combine close analysis with unbiased judgments. Thus, galloping in the field of literature, I have almost covered the whole ground. Yet language cannot exhaust meaning. Even the sage finds it hard to do so. My views are limited to a tube. How can I discuss fully the laws of writing? Gone are days of yore, uncertain the times to come. My meager knowledge will soon be buried. I only hope that it will not cloud the view of future generations. So that, as I say, was from the 50th chapter, where he gives a summation of the book as a whole. This is the translation by Yang Guobin. If you don't need the Chinese and can find it in a one-volume edition, I would recommend this translator to you. The two-volume set was a little bit of a pain because when reading volume 1, in the case of there being a footnote, you had to go to volume 2. All of the footnotes for the book are at the back of volume 2. But for the most part, I did not need the footnotes, and when I did look up a footnote, oftentimes it was not particularly useful to me. I did, however, like having access to the Chinese, even though for the most part it is above my head. That the final chapter, or chapter 50, oddly enough, was transposed into the first chapter of this other translation. And I began in November reading this to make up for a DNF, having not finished this book 8 years before. And it was a little bit slow going, and I posted little pieces on the community tab on YouTube, and I was very lucky. I have viewers out there that just know so much about everything, so much more than I do. I mean, I'm just this guy looking through a tube, if you will. And one of you pointed out, I had set the two versions of a paragraph side by side, and one of you explained it to me so carefully and really helped me to see that Yang Guobing was the translation for me. I agree with Steve Donahue's oft stated dictum that one should read the translation that most sits well with you as a reader. However, I was really torn between these two. The first one, and it actually is the first translation done of the book, I thought that the language was more flowery, and oftentimes that will be the deciding factor for me. But my viewer pointed out that this one really appeared to cut closer to the bone of the actual meaning, and in this case, I felt that it was the right choice, and indeed it proved to be the right choice. 8 years ago, it was in the run-up to the presidential election that I was reading this book, and I got to chapter 33, I think, on the day that, or the day before that we heard Donald Trump had won the presidential election. And we were in San Francisco, and I set the book aside and never got back to it. So with Donald Trump's returning imminently to the office of the president, I decided that it would be a good move on my part to finish this book off. And since it was 8 years before, I decided that I must read it from the beginning. So I read this, I think, 5 chapters, and then I had that epiphany, thank you, and so I switched to this, but I started this from the beginning again. And so I do feel a measure of success with completing this book because it was a bit of unfinished business and because it also marks my determination, in spite of the chaos that we can foresee under the forthcoming Republican administration, it marks my determination to continue ahead with my own life and my interests and not get derailed by all of the chaos which one may expect will be occurring all around us. Now, of course, that is not fail-safe. There is no guarantee. Last term, because of the failure to manage the coronavirus situation, we wound up suffering a much greater pandemic than it need have been. And we can expect some sort of fiasco or fiascos. There's no reason to limit it to one in the forthcoming term. We got lucky previously, and I don't believe that our luck will hold out. So I don't particularly foresee that I will be a person who is, say, personally targeted for this or that, even though I have a long track record of speaking my mind and speaking what I perceive to be the truth. And it is people like that that many in this administration wish to target and wish to see destroyed. But I don't have a lot of fears in that regard, so I am supposing it more likely that there will be some kind of general calamity, say some famine induced that might have been averted. Such things have happened before, and so we just cannot foresee and we cannot predict. but insofar as I have the ability, I am going to proceed forth in my reading and in my life just as I see fit. So I think that's an important task for any of us. I have a video somewhere where I discussed it, I think just in the wake of the results of the election being known, taking the ideal or the idea that our forthcoming administration and presidency is going to be like that cabal of the character Edward G. Robinson in the movie Key Largo. So I will put a link to that in the description, plus anything else that is pertinent. I somewhere have a video where I discussed in detail my plans for Historathon, which include that I want to focus heavily on some big books of Chinese history. I'm going to start with ancient China if I can, and then I am going to continue with the Harvard series of Imperial China. So I've read the first 3 books, and I am hoping to finish the last 3 books. I also have ambitions to read the Dream of the Red Chamber. It's translated in various ways, and I don't remember which is the most adequate one. It's a very sprawling Chinese novel, and I'm thinking of holding that till March of the Mammoths, which is a month wherein booktubers try to read big, long books, door stoppers, as some people will call them. Beyond that, I don't really have set plans, but I do want to focus more on, I think, China and Chinese history, just because I have a backlog of things calling for my attention. And it feels very satisfying to, as I say, close the book on something. This book really was marvelous, but its appeal will probably only pertain to a very specific range of readers. An awful lot of the book was just talking about literature of the past. So-and-so's poem was good, so-and-so's was not. This was better than that. And so it was just chock full of mentions of authors whose names I don't know, whose works I don't know, whose names I've never heard of, whose works I've never heard of, and so whose work lies outside of my reach to even look up and make comparisons with. So a good bulk of the book was probably not within the interest range of many potential readers out there. But there was a brief window of chapters, and I'm not quite sure exactly which chapters they were and how many there were, but around chapter 40 or so, where Liu Shih talked a lot about the process of writing, what makes good writing, what makes bad writing. So it was an all-around comprehensive work of literary criticism. And I found those portions eminently valuable. And I'm speaking as a person who has spent a lifetime writing. But it is honestly the case to get the 30 or however many it were odd sentences from this book that are very precise and show the process of writing in a new and more subtle light, even providing a way to analyze one's own texts that were worth all of the rest of the slog, insofar as it were a slog. And for me, it really wasn't. I said that it would be great if somebody would just extract all of those really marvelous gems and put them into a little handbook for the writer. But they lie where they do, embedded within this big overview of a text. And so I was glad that they were there, and I took them as I found them. I don't know if I will pursue any more books of Chinese literary theory. It might be a good time to reread something. Interestingly, a lot of mention was made. A very early form was Chinese rhyme prose, and I've never looked at this book, but it was a deciding factor in weaning me from this book, in that I don't believe that this translator was a literary scholar in the field, at least. He was probably a general scholar who came to the text and did his best, it being the first translation. But 8 years ago when I read it, I had no clue what I was reading. But this time, just even within the first 5 chapters, when I heard him talk about, he would say, flowery prose. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he could be talking about rhyming prose. And indeed, when I moved over to this edition, I found that he was. Now, I don't know what this form, the fu, is. I've never seen one in the Chinese. This anthology reprints some, and so maybe this would be a good time to do it. But it struck me something of a deficit to this book, that he did not use the term rhyme prose. He perhaps was not familiar with it. In English, it is a pretty standard term. So everybody tends to use the phrase rhyme prose, and everybody agrees on what they are talking about, which is this form, the fu, a very ancient form. So I know nothing about it itself. My Chinese would not be good enough, but one never knows. I may get there in the future. I can have aspirations, perhaps. But even so, I liked the fact that Yang Guobing was just a little bit more careful and a little bit more precise. And again, I thank my viewer for really pointing that fact out to me. When Steve Donahue tells people that they should read the translation that suits them the best, that they like the best, that they are pretty confident that they will read, he is absolutely correct, and I endorse him in that. But he tends to follow that advice with another statement, which is dead wrong, especially in my situation. He will tell his viewers that you should read whichever translation you like. You can always read another one. And for many of us, and for me particularly, it is very likely that I will not have the time to read another one. And so being very careful about finding the right translation is important to me. And in this case, I am very glad that I did. The text was a lot more comprehensible to me, even though I had no idea about the literature that he was discussing. It was so much more clear than my reading of it 8 years ago. So that, that, of course, it helps to explain why I set it aside and never got back to it. So as far as the rest of my reading, 2 days ago, I finished Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And I said I was going to give up on Was Huck Black. It was my plan to finish off the year with this. I said I would not do that, but just looking at the book, I'm seeing that it is 143 pages long, and the font is not tight. It's something that should be pretty doable. And one thing I have learned, as a general life principle, you must leap at opportunity when it presents itself. What was the phrase by Blake? He who catches joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. Well, that's how it has to be with opportunity. And for me, I realize, even though I would like to leave Mark Twain behind, and I don't want another voice clamping upon my impressions so swiftly, with only 143 pages to go, I can give myself a little bit of a window, say another week, and then I can hopefully barrel through this, hear what Shelley Fisher Fishkin has to say, and not let it tamper with my personal impressions about the book itself. And when will I be more inclined or more likely to tackle a book like this than when I have just finished the book itself? I had initially thought, well, maybe I will just file it away. I do own the copy, and in a year's time, when some distance has elapsed, I'll pull it out. But I know how life goes. One thing leads to another, things change. That famine that I mentioned may be upon us. So we just don't know where things lead. But what is the Robert Frost line or poem? Knowing how way leads on to way. And that is the absolute truth as well. So this is here now. So I will probably just continue on with it. In lieu of that, I had been planning to read Euclid, the 13 books of the elements, and I read another proposition. And actually, I read a couple of propositions, really enjoyed it. And I think somehow, because this book is filled with a lot of notes and explanatory matter, which, as with the Chinese book, are all above my head. So I would be looking at things through a tube again. But approaching the text itself, the translation is good. I reread the first portion. He's very clear in his definitions. A YouTuber, is it Alex O'Connor? I just saw a little short, and he was discussing philosophy with somebody named Destiny, perhaps, and they said, in philosophy, a major deal is definitions and getting the definition right. And people just don't tend to realize how critical that is. And it made me think of this book. He is so careful. And of course, it's a step removed because we are getting it in a translation. And I found the rereading itself was good. And I think that somehow, if I can fit it into my day, I should try to keep in touch with this on a daily basis. My mind is so rusty from mathematics and geometry. It's really slow going. And I think that touching upon it a little bit every day would be refreshing and the right way to go, regardless of whether I am just reading the same proposition day after day over and over. If that's what it takes, then that's what I should do. And that will free me up from any sense of, oh, I have to try to get this done, completed in a certain window of time. For something like this, the main thing will be trying to understand exactly what is going on. So I'm hopefully going to I believe my partner has a compass, a geometer's compass somewhere amongst the art supplies, and I may get my big white notebook and try to draw the circles and triangles and whatnot on my own just to keep up with it. The only real question for me is, when will I do that? How will I fit something like that in? Because it does require a little bit of time. We're talking another thing that's daily, and I already have daily commitments. I am hoping to read the history of Great Britain and France in North America, written by Parkman. I forget his first name. It's a big book, and my goal is to pull it out every night, last thing before bed, and read some set amount. And within the course of a year, hopefully make it through the work entire. So with that being the case, then it's kind of hard to sort of fill up another slot in my day. And I do want to read, as I say, some major books of Chinese history and other things. So I just don't know. And so as far as all the rest of my plans, I don't know at all where I am going to go with things. One of my other many DNFs, and DNF is BookTube's for Do Not Finish, probably 10 years ago again, was this book. It's a book in two parts, The Siege and the Commune, and I read The Siege and dropped off when I got to the Commune. And theoretically, I could just pick up at the Commune, but I've decided that, as with this, if I choose to go here, I will have to read the whole thing complete. But I don't know that this is the right book for me at this time, because I am trying to focus on China this year to the extent that I can. It really was a nice read, as I recall, and I would like to get there. I think it must have been 2015 that I was reading it. So a little bit before 8 years ago. And that said, when I determined that I would not be reading Was Huck Black this year, I slipped in another book, Minor Detail. Where's the author? Oh, of course, they've covered up the author's name. Well, libraries do that kind of thing. They've also covered up the back cover blurb. I don't exactly know why I picked this up. I think, again, it was a viewer who mentioned it. I don't remember if it was straight out a recommendation. I think it was, though. And I'm halfway through it already. It's a very short book. In this edition, 105 pages, beginning at what, 3? No, beginning at page 9. No, whoops. No, I had 2 were stuck together. Beginning at 7. So it's less than 100 pages, and I'm not rushing forward, with any kind of haste, but I expect I will be getting this finished before Christmas. It is translated by Elizabeth Jacquet, and I did look up the blurb just so I would know what it said. And this is not a blurb, this is just the back cover description. Let me read it to you so you know what it's about. This spare and haunting novel cuts to the heart of the experience of erasure dispossession, and life under occupation in Palestine, and reveals the difficulty of piecing together the shards of a narrative concealed by a fragmented history. Minor detail begins during the summer of 1949, 1 year after the war that the Palestinians mourn as the Nakba, the catastrophe that led to the displacement and expulsion of some 700,000 people. Israeli soldiers attack a group of Bedouins in the Negev desert, killing everyone except a teenage girl. They capture the girl and later rape her, kill her, and bury her in the sand. Many years later, in the near present day, a woman in Ramallah tries to uncover some of the details surrounding this particular rape and murder and becomes fascinated to the point of obsession, not only because of the nature of the crime, but because it was committed exactly 25 years to the day before she was born. Adania Shibli masterfully overlays these two translucent narratives to evoke a present forever haunted by the past. And I must say that having finished the first half, it really gives you a clear picture of the times, the events, and to a degree of the ideology. So I am really happy that I have begun this. I read, I think it was earlier in the year, 3 different books by the poet Mahmoud Darwish, and I am very pleased to be reading something else more current that touches upon the situation in Palestine and of the Palestinians. It's a history I know very little of, and I have said before, sometimes I find my best history comes from novels. So that is how my year is shaping up. As I say, I have made no real hard, fast plans for the year coming or forthcoming, except for those Chinese works that I mentioned. But I do need to think about it. Probably at the end of the year, I will do a recent reads video wrapping up everything that I've read since the last recent reads video. And then sometime after that, I will do a look back at the year as a complete unit. And not only that, but the third year in a sequence of me trying to improve my reading skills. So I will let that go, leave that there, as I seem to wind up saying all the time. And I expect I will be intermittent until the new year. I will still be around, and one never knows. I am not really pressed for time, so I may well be popping on as circumstances and whatever is in my mind permit. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.